last year and is taking place of the Natural Resources Board, which handled Act 250 issues. So we may from time to time deal with legislation, look at legislation that has Act 250 ramifications. So we wanted to just meet and hear a little bit more about the board, which has just been stood up, I think, in the last month or so. Why don't we start with introductions, though, since many of us are new. So I'm David Durfee. I am from Shaftesbury and represent Sunderland and Glastonbury. Welcome.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent, all of Grand Isle County and the western portion of Milton.
Jed Lipsky, I represent Lamoille 1, so.
Richard Nelson, represent Orleans 1, Derby.
Michelle Boslin, NIM3, Westminster, Rockingham, and Brookline in northern Wyndham County.
Frank Burt, Cabot, Danville, Beecham. John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, that's Royalton and Tunbridge.
And Representative Supranat will be joining us, I think. Sonia, our committee assistant, we've worked with before. And then could I just ask that our guest to introduce himself too?
I'm Michael Harrington, I'm chair of the Vermont Commerce Chamber.
Nice to meet you. I'll turn it over to you then, Pete.
Great. Pete Gill, I'm Executive Director for the Land Use Review Board, and with us on the screen here, yep.
And I'm Janet Hurley, the new chair of the board.
Hi, Janet.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you.
Janet, do you want to give a little bit of your background for the folks here? in the room?
I most recently, I come from the Bennington County Regional Commission, where I was the assistant director and planning program manager. Prior to that, I worked for the town of Manchester as the planning director and zoning administrator for 8 years. I did at one point work as a planner for the town of Milton, for the town of Westford, and for the city of South Burlington. I think that the board that was just seated actually last Monday, Rep. Durfee, has a wealth or a broad range of professional experience that's really going to lend well to implementing the changes that were made by Act 181. We have 3 planners, one who was a town manager for the last few years, and an environment or a land use attorney, and someone who worked for many years as a district coordinator, but is also an engineer. So I think those varied backgrounds will serve well to get this new framework rolled out in the next few years.
Yeah, it's an excellent collection of folks, and like Janet said, it's been just about 10 days that we've had them, and we've been onboarding, so they are drinking from the fire hose, getting up to speed, and doing a wonderful job with all of that. So I wanted to just go through a little bit about Act 250, just the elevator conversation level. And then give you the same kind of level in terms of Act 181 and what kind of changes that went through. And specifically with that, talk a little bit about the wood products report that the Land Use Review Board is responsible for. And just a quick note on the accessory on farm business provisions that were part of Act 181. So with that, a lot of text on this slide. Apologies for that. Kind of 3 sections there. First is just to let you know, this Act 250 is a permitting system. It's statewide, it's comprehensive. It includes review for projects that are within its jurisdiction of over 32 sub-criteria. And it looks at impacts to natural environment, the historic resources, agricultural resources, government services, transportation, infrastructure, energy use. I could go on. Quite a few. How do you know if you're in it? Because not all projects are in it. Well, you look at whether a permit is required. And you can see up there, it's basically based on whether, depending on what type of project it is or what size the project is, and that could be the size of the acreage or the size of number of units, et cetera. So as you look there, you can see if you're subdividing, you create either 6 lots or 10 lots, that would trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. If you're talking about units, how many housing units you've created, create 10, up to 10 units there. Commercial, you're talking about whether you're on a parcel size that's 1 acre or 10 acre. I'll pause there for a second because I've given you the 1 and the 10 and the 6 and the 10, and you're like, why is there 2? Well, there's 2 because if the town has adopted zoning and subdivision bylaws, then the threshold goes up. So there's less state review when the town has taken on some of those responsibilities through their subdivision and zoning bylaws. So that's why there's those 2 different categories there. And then there is a enumerated list of many others. A couple of those that I've listed here is water withdrawals and oil extraction. Fissile material is another one. These are not common. Those are there's a list of them in the statute, but they're not ones that we typically see. And then, as you'll note here, there's also a section here about when you don't have a permit. When does Act 250 not apply? So farming, logging, forestry, as long as it's below 2,500 feet in elevation, it does not need a permit. Those are obviously commercial activities, but they are not, but they are specifically exempt. There is a laundry list of other exemptions. I think they have now hit the full alphabet plus double letters in that list. So there's quite a few for very specific needs and areas.
Yeah, Morgan.
So it's no permits, Act 250 wise, but there could be locally.
Yes, there could
Or
be
regionally.
regionally, and there could also be other state permits. So Act 250 is kind of an umbrella. It has this comprehensive review, pulls in lots of other permits as well. But some of those permits are freestanding and will be required regardless of whether there's Act 250.
You alluded earlier to the wood products report. And I'm noting that in the last bullet item there, the exemptions list does not include wood product manufacturing. So that's why we'll be getting a report on that. What about farm processing operations? So if you had an on-farm food processing, would that require a permit?
Yeah, so last year in Act 181, one of the general principles of 181, and we'll get into this in a few slides here too, but just to answer the question, one of the principles was to kind of align the different permitting systems from state to municipal, regional, and one of those things was there was accessory on-farm provisions on the municipal level, but there wasn't that companion on the Act 250 level. Now there is companion exemption on the Act 250 level.
Exemption. If it's
yes.
more than 51%, 51%,
So
at least 51% of your homegrown product.
Yeah. So right there. So now there is provisions within Act 250 that reflect that now too.
Yeah.
Representative Lipsky?
Thank you. Peter, in this context, you say comma or forestry. What's your definition of forestry?
It's
It's
not.
not-
I think we have a specific definition. I definitely don't have it right off the top of my head, but yeah.
I think it's this silvicultural best practices that are defined in statute.
Thank you, John. But maybe from the rural caucus, certainly, and there was some discussion, I think support last biennium for small scale forest operations, for firewood operations, small sawmills, and I think it was mulch, bark mulch and compost and chip operations. But that's not, those are sort of
Yeah.
a processing of a product as opposed to forestry as in silviculture.
Exactly.
But
That is-
as
yeah.
Chairman Durfee alluded, and you in your opening remarks, you said we'll have some time to discuss some of those.
Yeah, so
As
the wood
an
products
amendment to your-
manufacturing study is underway and will be delving into those very issues.
But not in our committee meeting today. Would there be an update?
I'll give you a quick update on
Okay.
that. Yeah,
In due course.
in due course here, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
No,
Representative O'Brien.
Pete, just general information question. Do federal, state and municipal developments have to go through Act 250?
federal, state and municipal, so federal purpose would not. State does, there's not a fee for those, they have different thresholds. And municipal similarly, state and municipal are interesting, so you saw on there that 10 acres. And if a state or municipality wants to do a project and it's involving 10 acres, the actual project, so putting in the infrastructure for driveways and the building and the lawns, et cetera, that if that meets the threshold of 10 acres, then it would be required. For other projects, it's based on, the standard is based on the acreage of that parcel. Thank you for raising that distinction.
One more question.
One more question. Agritourism. If someone wanted to build a cabin on their land to house guests to the farm, to experience the agricultural thing or, that sort of thing, would that be part of that on-farm accessory building that would be exempt for Act 250 if it wasn't meant to be a year-round dwelling?
Yeah, so there's explicit language in Act 181 that doesn't include those types of events space at the in that language right now. On the municipal side, it's different.
So it would exempt them,
No,
or it was-
It for Act 250 purposes,
Yes.
it's not exempt.
it isn't exempt, okay.
All right, again, elevator version, there's a lot of detail to this law. There we go. Just to give you a quick overview of kind of how the governance and the structure works and who does what. For Act 250, you can see this map shows the different districts that the state is divided in for Act 250 purposes. The Land Use Review Board oversees all of that and the operations of the district commissions. The district commissions are the ones 1 through 9 there that review permit applications when they come through. So if somebody does need an Act 250 permit, they would go to that commission. They are individuals that live in those counties and review applications that are in front of them on over those 32 criteria, and then issue permits for that. To help them in that process, we have district coordinators and also tech staff that help with the issuance of those permits, et cetera. The district coordinators also issue jurisdictional opinions. So if anybody is curious, looking back at that last slide, am I 1 acre, 10, how many units am I? Does this qualify? Does it not? They're the persons that they can ask and get an official opinion to say it's in or it's out. Just a quick summary of some of the recent numbers for Act 250. We generally issue about 300 to 400 permits per year. Very small number of those, about 5% go to hearing. We have kind of 2 classifications, and this committee might be knowing a little bit about kind of that minor process because as Representative Lutski was saying earlier, in terms of the minor process, there is a particular minor process that is prescribed in statute for certain firewood processing under a certain threshold. So the minor process just means that's kind of the regular process, standard application. The major process, same application, just happens that in those cases, somebody has requested a hearing. That could be the applicant, that could be somebody else, neighbor, et cetera, that said, hey, we want a hearing. Then it becomes a major, goes in front of the commission for its review that way.
Brian?
Just quickly, is there an appeals process?
And the appeals of commission decisions go through the environmental division of the Superior Court. And then here, another factoid there is about 0.2 0.2% of projects are denied. That comes out to about roughly one or so a year that are denied. So pretty rare occurrence there on that. In terms of appeals, it's about 1 to 3% per year. That's about five to 10. On the jurisdictional opinion side, it's also around 5 to 10 appeals that we receive. And our staff's been issuing about 270. This has been increasing over the last several years. The number of jurisdictional opinions that have increased, and there's multiple factors for that we have to load there.
Just following up on my question, would the next stop be this Vermont Supreme Court? You didn't like where the Superior Court left it? Okay.
So district commission does their decision. There is a process for reconsideration of that, and then that's all internal, and then goes to the environmental court and then to the Supreme Court. So moving into Act 181, again, we're talking elevator, 30,000-foot view here. I like this graphic because it kind of shows you the three main areas that Act 250, Act 181 was looking at working on. First is the regional future land use categories. So all the regional plans have land use categories. What type are they? You know, is it a village center? Is it a resource-based recreation area? What is it? That gets mapped. Prior to Act 181, there was various terms on each of the regional plans. Now that's consistent. Now they're working on getting those, updated throughout the entire state with those similar terms. And those, interestingly, will be reviewed by the Land Use Review Board, whereas before they really didn't have that weight to them. Now they have an approval process for those plans. The next kind of column down there, or row down, I should say, is the state designation program. That was another change within Act 181. And that basically said, we've got multiple programs. Let's simplify this for communities. We're going to have centers and we're going to have neighborhoods. We're going to have steps within that they can achieve. This is the way that community investment is doled out in the state through these programs. The next one there is the Act 250 side. Oops, I just clicked the wrong way there. And you can see that we have tiers of jurisdiction that you might have heard of. This is this idea of taking the jurisdiction that we talked about before for Act 250 based on acreage or units and saying, hey, let's look at this as in a geographic area and saying these areas, there's going to be jurisdiction. These areas, there's going to be a little bit less. These areas, there's going to be a little bit less. So if you look at this list here, Tier 1A, if you're within one of those areas, that would correspond to downtown center, village center, planned growth area. There would be a full exemption for Act 250 in those areas for those projects down the road. We're not here yet, but we're going towards this under this legislation. Tier 1B, you're allowed certain housing threshold, 50 housing units in those areas. Tier 2, that's kind of the status quo. There's an addition of a road rule in that area, which is an additional jurisdictional trigger. And then there's Tier 3 hiding way over there on the corner that you can't quite see because there's some little script that came up there. But at any rate, that's the kind of the third area, these special resource areas. I'll just note on this slide, none of this is geographic. This is all just, a graphical representation. This is the sizes don't match up with anything that way. In terms of Act 250, kind of how did Act 181, what was the focus there? Well, it was on governance, this new full-time board they've got, some new responsibilities besides the overall oversight of Act 250. In general, they're going to be reviewing those regional plans and approving them. They're going to be approving the future land use maps that the regional planning commissions are going to be coming up with in collaboration with their municipal entities. They're going to be designating the Tier 1A and 1B areas. They're going to be approving the designation areas. Again, those are the ones that are tied to the community investments. And then they've got a number of reports and rulemaking, one of which I mentioned earlier with products. Jurisdiction. So on that, we've got these interim housing exemptions. The idea there is that, and we have already implemented these. They are up and running. We've got maps and guidance documents for folks to see where do they meet these exemption areas. The idea there is kind of this twofold purpose, right? It helps bring this whole regime into existence of jurisdiction based on location where it is. And it also is working on our housing prices in that way too. Again, like I said, we've got the tiers that is a jurisdictional change for Act 250, and then this addition of the road rule. And we have a new review criteria. So I had said 32 criteria. If you need a permit from Act 250, it's reviewed under 32 criteria. Act 181 added one more to 33. And this one is on habitat connectors and forest fragmentation. So that would be another level of review that the district commissions would be doing on permit applications. So what you guys might be most interested in here, time check here, is the wood products manufacturing report. This was originally due earlier this year, at the start of the year. Unfortunately, we were not able to meet that goal, and we requested an extension till March 15th. It's highly likely, as I was just talking to your chair, that we will be requesting an additional extension for that report. The team that is working on this, as I said, the Land Use Review Board was just seated a few weeks ago. And so they're still getting their feet on the ground, and I think it would be very important for them to be engaged in that process. And I've kind of mapped out where we've gone and where we're going in the next slide here. Are you all familiar with this wood products report enough, or should I touch base on those items?
Touch base.
Okay, so the report here was requiring us to look at our permitting process, right? And particularly with these wood products manufacturers like sawmills or firewood processors, right? And looking at how the minor processing worked. So as I mentioned earlier, there is this provision in Act 250 and up there, 6084G, that says for wood products manufacturers, if you're going, you would be treated as a minor permit process in those. That would be kind of the default, start as a minor. And this report is saying, is that working? How's that going? Check in, see where that's going. So that's, are there shortcomings or the challenges with that? Is it addressing the concerns and needs of folks in that industry? So that's kind of the main overarching thing. They're going to be looking also at, the permitting holistically. So there's, like I said, a host of different permits that Act 250 brings into its review process, and people can say, oh, I have a permit for stormwater. I'm going to incorporate that in, check the box off of one of those 32 criteria, right? Because you've got that other permit. So, this study is going to be looking at some of those other permits and those processes as well, and saying, are those working? What are the challenges, the shortcomings of that as well? So they, let me go to the next slide here, and this kind of shows you what we've completed to date. We've done a lot of data collection and collecting various permits, trying to figure out if we've got the right sample sizes, et cetera, to get good, solid data on this project. One thing that we have identified is there is a little bit of a dearth in some of that number of permits to really be able to tell what is happening in this arena. So we want to do surveys, and we want to do interviews with folks to get more information about this. So some of this is quantitative and some of it is qualitative. And we want to be able to get both aspects of that. We've received recently some advice from the state chief performance officer on the survey questions and how those how those are worded to make sure that we are getting quality responses to those. And the next steps is launching that survey, getting it out there to the identified stakeholders and permittees, applicants who've gone through the process, and see what their comments are, and then it'll be a matter of putting all that information together and analyzing it, and talking to stakeholder groups about their ideas and thoughts for how this might work, and then drafting a report, getting comments from the public on that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking that we are going to need an extension beyond some of these other data-driven pieces, but is to ensure that we get good comments on the draft report, and we're going in the right direction so that we can give you all something solid to base your decision-making and further work on.
Representative.
Yeah, I don't want to sound ignorant, but what does dearth mean in this
Oh,
context?
lack of, sorry, yeah.
It wasn't a lack of disinformation.
Yeah, just, I mean, so when you're doing kind of data analysis, if you have a sample size of one, you're not going to get really good data. If you got a sample size of several hundred for a particular project, that might be great, So we're finding that the number of applicants just from, I think this provision that G sub G came into effect maybe 2017, 18, somewhere in there. And so just the number of applications to look at in that time period, fairly small. So we're trying to broaden that and think about it in different ways to get good information.
Why I'm interested in the status of this report is tomorrow at 9:30, I'm reporting on some legislative efforts on behalf of Vermont Forest Products Association annual meeting, which I happen to be a member of them, not a significant member, but I'm a member. But I'd like to be able to give them some accurate, they want to know, is anything being done that's going to be supportive of their struggling sector.
Yeah. So this
So there's nothing
report is well underway, but
that's underway, but it's
not anything to
not
share at this
in
point.
the, is there a timeline where either the legislature will get, and this committee will get, is it July 1? Do you think?
We, so tentative, I don't want to speak out of turn on it, but in the spring is what we're looking at, probably around May. We had the folks that are working on this kind of do a stepwise backwards thing, like, okay, if we have a comment period of this, how much time do we need for that, and kind of pulling that back. And that's kind of the range that they were looking at. The newly seated board had directed staff that were working on this to do that. And so they wanted to have that before they went and requested an additional extension. Just made that official, but.
Now, if I may, for explanation, we had a few forest products of these smaller category reported in this committee, not this year, but previous biennium, about the cost and the impact. And there were a couple of them who basically said what it costs them to go through the Act 250 process. Specifically, had they known at the time, they probably would have chose not to invest in a small scale manufacturing in Vermont. But I want to publicly say the caveat of this was, which was not necessarily an Act 250 criteria, had to do with the stormwater, the costs of infrastructure for stormwater protection. So it's not all point directed at Act 250, but it's just quite a hurdle. And particularly the capital and the time, or they ever got a judgment or information. They applied New Hampshire, built a full-blown operation, had their permits in a matter of very brief period of time.
Janet, I see you have a hand up. If you want, did you want to respond?
Just that one of Pete's earlier slides noted that part of the report will look at those kinds of ancillary permit considerations. Isn't that right, Pete?
That's correct.
Yeah, and then also that Act 181 identified particular stakeholders that need to be engaged, and we, although those stakeholders have been identified, they haven't been engaged yet. And I presume that the association that you may be presenting to tomorrow could be among those stakeholders, and if not, perhaps they want to be and could reach out to us to make sure that they are.
Well, thank you, Chairman or Director, pardon me. I will encourage them to reach out to be part of the engagement.
Yeah, please do.
I will.
Just before we leave this subject too, and we'll come back to it. I don't know whether the timeline question got answered, but I just wanted to say again, really, that the legislature had, in its wisdom, last year, put together all of these requirements, including looking not just at Act 250, but looking at it holistically. Because we'd taken testimony from manufacturers who had brought us their concerns. And we said, give us this report, please, by December 15th. And as you just pointed out, Pete, the board wasn't even appointed until after that. Yeah, so we want you to do it right and to put the time in that's necessary. I'm impressed that you've got 5 completed bullet points already in the time that you've had. So thank you for that. I know there's another slide. I know we're running a little bit late. Do you want to just make a comment or two about this?
There wasn't much to say here, except, we have been collaborating with AAFM on the accessory on farm exemption. And we did receive one inquiry. We've been kind of tracking the inquiries that we've been getting on Act 181, and most of those have been on the housing side of things, but we did have at least one inquiry related to the AOFB. So just wanted to mention that. Anybody know what kind of chicken that is?
It's not a Rhode Island red.
It's more like a turkey vulture.
Yeah, it was, yeah. This is Americana.
Americana.
I have one in my hair, so I had to stick it in there.
You're celebrating your family on the
Chicken farmer.
He's one of us.
Small fly.
Just quickly, Pete.
Are recreational trails, not, Killington doing a new trail, but like Kingdom trails or vast trails, do those need to go through the Act 250 permitting?
Some trails are permitted, yes. So again, if you have the acreage, you have a commercial, it has to be a commercial operation. If you're not commercial, it's not. And if you have the records of acreage, then the trigger.
All right. Good. Janet, thank you for joining us. Nice to meet you. And we will look forward to getting the report and maybe check in with you at some point between now and then. Something else might come up too. So
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
all right, committee, why don't we keep things moving? It's Friday afternoon, and we've got the Cannabis Control Board here now. Welcome, James Tepper.
I'm joined by Kyle Harris, my other board member, and
Pull up a chair.
Julie Holbert is on the screen.
Hi, Kyle and Julie, welcome. We'll go around and introduce ourselves first, since some of us haven't met you, I think. I'm David Durfee. I am from Shaftesbury and represent Sunderland and Glastonbury.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent Grand Isle County and West Milton.
Jed Lipsky represent Lamoille 1 Stowe.
Richard Nelson, Orleans 1, Derby.
Michelle Boslin, Wyndham 3.
Greg Burt, Cabot, Danville, Peachum. Brian Royalton and Tunbridge.
And we've had a couple of conversations that just came up sort of organically in committee where cannabis was mentioned, or we ended up talking about cannabis industry and legislation, and thought it'd be good to have an overview of at least what the board's work is now. And we're going to also be hearing after we hear from the board from the cannabis, excuse me, the Vermont Cannabis Equity Board. Make sure I got that right. So why don't we have you guys introduce yourselves and we'll get going.
Great, yeah, and for the record, James Pepper, I'm the chair of the Cannabis Control Board.
I'm Kyle Harris. I'm one of the commissioners, Cannabis Control Board.
Julia Holbert, another commissioner.
So this issue touches a lot of different committees, the cannabis industry. And so I've prepared a presentation, but I found after delivering it a couple times, it is pretty dry and not very engaging. So I'd prefer, if it's all right, it's posted on your committee page, but just to kind of talk through some of the issues, give an overview of the board and the market and some of the trends that may impact the kind of long-term viability of the cannabis industry in Vermont.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay, so just a very brief history to cannabis policy. The Vermont legislature legalized medical cannabis in 2004. In 2018, you were the first state to legalize cannabis, not for tax and regulated purposes, but for home grow, cultivation, and simple possession. You removed some of the civil penalties that existed over possession up to an ounce and growing 6 plants. You don't have a binding ballot initiative process here in Vermont, meaning that all the states that came before you were kind of their hands were forced by a ballot initiative that made the legislature respond. You all had to kind of debate this policy over the course of a decade, and kind of the bill that eventually passed, Act 164 in 2020, went through 11 different committees between the House and the Senate. And I think every committee got an opportunity to add language to it. So very kind of different process in Vermont compared to other states. You created a 3-member independent body, the Cannabis Control Board. These are the inaugural members of the board. We were appointed in April of 2021 by the governor. We serve 3-year terms. We can be reappointed up to 2 times. We have currently a 26-member staff spread over 4 divisions: operations, compliance, licensing, and the medical program. We're in the process of building a quality assurance lab to do kind of independent testing, keep an eye on the existing independent labs, and do kind of all the testing that we need to do, very similar to the Vail lab in Randolph. Historically, jurisdiction over cannabis was in the judiciary committees. That's when it was illegal. That kind of conversation shifted when that conversation shifted from legality to tax and regulate. Primary jurisdiction went to House Government Operations on the House side and Senate Economic Development on the Senate side. However, this committee has weighed in on cannabis issues in the past. You don't generally take possession of the bills, but you do kind of have amendment authority. Of course, Ways and Means sets all the fees, which can kind of have a dramatic impact on how the market actually rolls out. State cannabis markets are unique because of the federal status. Cannabis cannot cross state lines, meaning that every gram of cannabis that's sold here legally has to be grown here, produced here, tested here, and packaged here. So that makes our job at the board a little bit challenging, trying to make sure that we're meeting the demand for cannabis, but not exceeding that, not oversupplying the market so that, prices crash and, no one can make any money, but also not undersupplying the demand. And of course, that demand is a function of a lot of factors that are outside of, most of our licensees' control. I always just like to add a little caveat here that cannabis operators, cannabis licensees cannot take out bank loans to start a business. They get no support from the USDA or the Small Business Administration. There are no lines of credit in this industry. There are no federal tax write-offs. There's no bankruptcy protection. And everything from lease agreements to insurance policies to basic banking services all of those operators charge a premium for their services. So, you know, the cannabis industry is walking a very kind of high wire act without a safety net. I just always like to remind people of that because it is an industry like no other. And then beyond that, Vermont has some unique features that make our market different than any other state. The legislature, when they were debating this original bill, knew that Vermont's competitive advantage is not in volume. It's in a diversity of kind of small batch craft cultivators. And you built some provisions into Act 164 in 2020 to achieve that kind of vision for the market. First thing you said is, you actually wrote some intent language into the bill. You said it's the intent of the General Assembly to move as much of the illegal cannabis market as possible into the regulated market. And that you wanted to rely on small local farmers. So that's very different than most other states, which really are trying to stamp out the black market and replace it with big business. We are really trying to do a shift here. Acknowledge that, cannabis is pretty much ubiquitous in the state of Vermont. It was pre-legalization and it is now. So let's try and shift those licensees, those kind of operators and consumers into the regulated market. And then you said in order to do that, you define what a small cultivator was, 1,000 square feet or less, pretty much the size of this room. And, anyone who's licensed as a small cultivator, the board can make accommodations in our regulations to allow them kind of reduce the barriers to entry and reduce the operating costs for the smallest possible players. You also created kind of a first in the country, first of its kind, one license per entity rule. And this means that there's no franchising, none of the kind of, there's not going to be the Starbucks of weed, there's not going to, you're not going to have the same kind of retailer, single-owned retailer on every corner in Vermont. Everyone gets one license.
You can vertically integrate, but you can't horizontally integrate. You can own a retail license, a cultivation license, a manufacturing license, but you can't hold more than one of any of those types.
1,000 square feet, that's outdoor grow or is that for all?
That's all tier one. We have
Indoor or outdoor.
Indoor or outdoor.
We have like a calculation that we do because you can get up to 4 harvests a year indoors versus 1 outdoor given our climate here. So we do have some plant count calculations that kind of try to level the playing field between outdoor and indoor, given the ability to continuously harvest versus one-stop shop.
Right. So how successful have we been in achieving this kind of vision? I'll say that we have currently 610 licensed businesses kind of spread throughout our 7 license types, although 396 of those licensees are cultivators. So the rest are the kind of manufacturers, the testing facilities, the retailers, wholesalers.
How many are the
Cultivators?
cultivators?
396.
Thank you.
And then of those 396, 75% of those are tier 1 cultivators. So the backbone of this industry are people growing on very small plots, and 1,000 square feet or less really does not register in other states. In Massachusetts, their tier 1 is 5,000 square feet of canopy. That would be an extremely large tier for Vermont.
So,
Go ahead. Yeah.
so 50 plants, I grew hemp.
Yeah.
I've never played in anything to do with marijuana, but I did
Yeah.
grow hemp, so I'm familiar with how big, if you do a good job, they can get.
Our plant ratio, because you said 1,000 square feet, you didn't do a plant count for tier 1, but we decided that, for outdoor, the equivalent of 1,000 square feet would be 125 plants.
125 plants, okay.
We tried to incorporate elements that I'm sure you're familiar with, given 4 feet between certain plants
Mhm.
that you need to grow to allow them to grow to a point that, turns a dollar on the back end. Right. So a lot of that plant count and trying to align that with the 1,000 square foot language, we've really tried to focus on the size of the plant and not that, black space between plants, that negative space.
Okay, and I realize that there's no banking. Most of it's cash, can't use a credit card, I guess, or, how do they get the seeds? I mean, are they cultivating to make seeds in Vermont, or we just don't talk about that?
Well, when you guys legalized possession and home grow, that was a question on everyone's mind. And it was the don't ask, don't tell mentality. Since then, the DEA has determined that seeds meet the federal definition of hemp and are legal. So seeds actually can be shipped through the mail.
Because they haven't yet crossed that 0.3% THC barrier that would turn it from hemp into
There you
a
go. Yeah.
THC product.
Yeah.
We have over 4,000 unique registered products. Most of those are kind of variations of strains of flower, but we also have the kind of edibles and vaping cartridges and clones and topicals. How's the market doing? JFO just updated their revenue forecast in January. FY23 taxable sales were 47.9 million. FY24, it's jumped to 124.3 million. That equates to, there's a 14% excise tax and a 6% sales tax on all those sales. So I'll just stick with FY24. That equated to 17.4 million in excise tax, 7.5 million in sales tax. And then the excise tax has 30% of it earmarked towards prevention efforts in the state. That's kind of led by the Substance Misuse Prevention Advisory Council. The other 70%, after it pays for our bills, goes to the general fund. And then the 7.5 million, the entirety of the sales tax is earmarked for a special fund at the Agency of Education to expand access to after-school programs. JFO, as part of their revenue forecast, is projecting this market to grow by 20% in FY25 to 148 million in taxable sales. And then FY26, 160 million, which would be an 8% increase over the FY25 number. So there's some trends and market forces that we keep a very close eye on that may impact the viability of this market in the long term. This is not unique to cannabis, but tourism plays a significant role in sales here. There's a slide in my presentation that kind of just shows month over month sales and how they ebb and flow. And it compares it to kind of how the tourism numbers ebb and flow throughout the year. And you can see the same kind of dips and peaks throughout that. We have a seasonal oversupply problem that we have to deal with every year, the cultivators have to deal with, where, you know, there's 60% of our cultivators are growing outdoors. So they're all harvesting at the exact same time, which leads to kind of stress on the other parts of the supply chain, the manufacturers and the testing facilities. But it also leads to a price dip that kind of levels out over the course of the year. But it is something that we try and keep a close eye on because, again, no lines of credit, no financing. You know, if you can't make ends meet at the end of the year, you know, you sometimes have to exit the market. There's a proliferation since 2018 of intoxicating hemp products. This committee dealt with this issue a little bit last biennium. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole here because this is a highly technical issue especially for a Friday afternoon. But the 2018 Farm Bill, federal Farm Bill, created a legal distinction between Schedule I marijuana and non-scheduled hemp. And they really kind of, in that bill, opened a Pandora's box with the definition that they chose for hemp that is being exploited by large kind of interstate companies, national companies, to really push intoxicating hemp-derived products without any real regulatory oversight. The definition of hemp that they used in the federal bill was based upon a percentage of THC in, you know, by weight. So it's not more than 3% THC on a dry weight basis of what they're testing. So really the first kind of loophole that these hemp producers are manipulating is, all right, all you have to do is increase the kind of weight of the product. You can extract all the THC from hemp, legally grown hemp. And as long as the product weighs enough, you can inject as much hemp-derived THC into it as you want, and theoretically, it's a legal product. So just by way of example, an 85-gram candy bar, could have 255 milligrams of hemp-derived THC in it and theoretically be legal to ship through the mail, to sell to kids, to not have any sort of packaging or advertising restrictions on it. And 255 milligrams, we have a per package limit in Vermont of 100 milligrams. So that's 2.5 times what our legal limit is in an adult use sale. The other thing is they also, the definition of hemp included all derivatives and isomers of cannabis. And so what the other kind of loophole is you take CBD that you've extracted out of hemp, you hit it with some sort of acidic reagent like a hydrochloric acid, and you can convert it into synthetic Delta-9 THC or some of the other ones that you may have heard of, like Delta-8, Delta-10, HHC, THCV, just the whole kind of alphabet soup of cannabinoids. And these are the health implications of these in their own right are unknown at best. We know some negative health aspects to Delta-8 specifically. But then you think there's also no CCB involved. There's no FDA involved in this. So their manufacturing practices, their purification practices, getting that kind of hydrochloric acid out of the finished product, their testing protocols, there's no one's keeping an eye on any of these products. And again, I have a slide that shows some of the kind of how they mimic popular candies and foodstuffs. And, in your free time, you can kind of look through the presentation.
Representative O'Brien?
Thanks, Nick. How many towns have opted in to do retail? Maybe cover it.
About a little over 80, I think maybe 89. It's about 30% of the towns. For those who don't know, the question is, one of the kind of lines in the sand that the administration drew and kind of the negotiations for the cannabis legalization bill was town should only be, no one should have to have a cannabis store until the town votes to have one. And so, the default presumption is a town will not have a cannabis shop unless their citizens vote to opt in. And about 80 towns so far, 80 or 90 towns have voted to opt in.
And just a finer point, that's just retail stores. You can still have a cannabis cultivation operation or a manufacturing facility or a wholesale facility in any municipality in the state, no matter if they've opted in or not.
Representative Nelson?
How do you figure the density of those stores? Because when you come up to Derby,
Yeah.
there's 3 of them within about 2 miles.
Yeah. I mentioned there was about 11 committees or so that weighed in on the cannabis legislation early on, and there's about 100 pages of rulemaking that the board is authorized to do. Not once was retail siting written into our authorization. And I think that really you created local control commissions, very similar to local liquor commissions. You gave them a lot of authority over kind of the time, place, manner of cannabis operations. And I think the legislature intended this to be kind of a local decision. Some towns may want them in close proximity to law enforcement agencies, or, some towns may want them kind of on the outskirts of town so the kids aren't kind of exposed to cannabis shops.
Someone downtown, like in Montpelier.
So I think
One in Newport.
Yeah.
Fine. I don't have a pony in the race, so I don't care.
So I think this was a local zoning decision, or it was meant to be, but this happened very quickly. It was a flip was switched and then COVID happened. And, I think towns didn't have enough time between the kind of passage of the bill and the opening of the market to really put these ordinances into place. Last year, you gave the board authority over retail siting, and we've now drafted rules, and we put a pause on issuing new retail licenses while we draft these rules. So kind of status quo currently is going to be the status quo for some time.
But there are proposals out there based on population density and other market factors to not allow more than X amount of stores per X amount of residents that are in that municipality.
That are more.
I'm on the cannabis control board in my town, and we have one retail store, but we It seems like every couple of months, we license a new person to grow.
Right.
In various parts. And we keep it, we don't make it public where those places are.
Yes, yeah.
It's rather more private in that respect.
Yeah, and we don't publish that data either, you know, yeah.
Representative O'Brien?
I just wondered if you did a spec specific indoor grow building, does that have to go through Act 250 or is there anything unusual about the land use board now with specific cannabis growing?
I would defer on the side of yes, especially if it's a new building, you know, depending on if it's you're revitalizing an old building versus a new building. I'm sure that there's some differences there. This is not an agricultural product, although it does have some agricultural protections. So it doesn't get the full exemptions that other even indoor agriculture may expect to receive from a zoning and permitting perspective.
Thank you, Chairman. I live in a town that has yet to pass an ordinance allowing retail. But it seems like the one value when you would read about Colorado, it's enabling a lot of revenue for state. Vermont's desperate for revenue. We push online gambling, push all sorts of things. And I certainly understand that cannabis generates money that certainly supports educational programs and stuff like that. But the other economic impact that Vermonters were concerned about is, would this help individuals who have agricultural property that have a profitable diversity of 1,000 square foot of land, whatever. And then in my area in Lamoille County, you see Ferraris pull up town. They might stop at a bar, but they're carrying money down to Boston. And then I hear some of these are international owned investors in some of these businesses. You know, and I'm not weighing in on any of that. It just, I'm concerned that the local farmer, the local producer is getting their share of the benefit to help sustain their family or age.
How's the price set?
Well, I'm just interested what the positive impacts are on the Vermonter who's trying to grow, maybe doesn't have the capital or the resources to be a retailer. Can you break down some of the profitability of the various stages?
Sure.
Without taking up a lot of committee time, but
Yeah, it is a very interesting question because our market opened almost at the exact same time as New York, although they ran a little bit slow. They ran into some legal issues, Connecticut and Rhode Island. And, you know, because of the express legislative directive, focus on small local cultivators, try and keep this market craft. We created a market structure at the board that is largely unattractive to these multinational, multi-state operators that really strive for economies of scale. And, you know, the one license per entity rule, it just doesn't, not being able to have 3 retail locations, for instance, like they are in Massachusetts or Rhode Island or elsewhere, and the size of our cultivation tiers and just the size of the market in general just really do not. And the fact that we're an uncapped licensing state, you know, a lot of the multinational states love these kind of regulatory moats that get set up. They love that, like, you know, we're only going to issue 50 licenses this year and we're going to do it by a lottery. You can buy as many lottery tickets as you want to enter in, like by raffle. They love that kind of setup. Our setup is much different. And so we didn't see a large number of multi-state operators enter our market. They certainly are here. We know, you know, you can't exclude them because there's still constitutional issues involved. But I think that to your question about profitability, certainly the retailers are in the best spot. They are They're the only ones that can go straight to the consumers. They get to set prices. Obviously, it's a function of how much supply, is in the state on the cultivation side. But we see I have seen some very, very successful tier one cultivators. Mostly on the indoor side, there's some just very unique challenges to being an outdoor grower in Vermont. And it's not just the kind of you're fighting with the weather and you're fighting with kind of pests and molds and things like that. But also, you only get one harvest a year. So you put your products in someone's retail space, your customers come back, they want the same product. Well, wait till the next harvest is essentially what they're told. So, as far as like consistency, retailers and wholesalers want someone who can kind of give them the same thing every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So, one of our reports, I don't want to get ahead of myself, is having more supports for outdoor tier one cultivators so that they can kind of have an equal playing field with some of the other people in the supply chain.
And I'll just add that I said earlier that this legally is not agriculture, but it still is an ag commodity, right? It's something that grows and it's something that's bought and sold through up and down the supply chain. And as Pepper alluded to across parts of his presentation thus far, these folks don't have access to a lot of the programming that a lot of small businesses in Vermont, whether agricultural or not, would have an opportunity to take advantage of, whether it's business support through doing business planning from somebody like Intervale, Farm and Forest Viability, or the Center for an Agricultural Economy. They can't do accelerator programs that BSGF would offer through their business coaches. They don't get the support from UVM Extension on a lot of the technical stuff because of federal funding entanglement. And this is a new industry coming into this state that needs that support. And they're another piece of the pie that's trying to take away from, the support that's desperately needed everywhere. I'm sure you all have heard over the last month from service providers and from other sectors of agriculture how amazing it is that to have the support from the State House on so many of their endeavors, or from the Working Lands Enterprise Board next week on a new piece of equipment that business might be able to buy or through grant sharing to further accelerate their business. Cannabis folks are on their own. They're not eligible for any of these programs. We're having a lot of really great conversations with a lot of those entities that I just referenced. But they are desperate. I think they desperately need a lot of that support. I used to work at the Agency of Agriculture. I was an ag dev specialist. I haven't been back in this committee in maybe 5 or 6 years, so it's great to be back. The amount of support that a lot of sectors of agriculture gets is incredible from the federal government and from the state government. These folks, we've made it easy to get into the market, relatively speaking. The next step is, how do we make sure that they stay in the market? And if they don't, what skills can they learn so that they exit gracefully and still are viable in whatever their next endeavor is? So a lot of that technical and business assistance that Pepper referenced, we think that that's a necessary next step to make sure that this market remains viable if it's going to maintain the characteristics that Vermont values, which is small craft operators built on the back of mom and pops. And we don't rely on the big out-of-state players that the representative is fearful of.
It sounds like the federal government still considers this, what we're doing in the state of Vermont, illegal. If that changes, it also sounds like there will be a lot of help and assistance and changes in that respect.
I don't know if that's going to be the case. I mean, it depends on how they want to structure that change. And I mean, they could just take it off Schedule 1, which is actually an administrative decision of the DEA, Department of Justice, and then just slap a tax on it and say, all right, interstate commerce, let the kind of strong survive. And the states that have established these, brands and have, different advertising rules may just swallow up everything that you're trying to build in Vermont.
So it may or may not be a good thing.
You could arguably grow cannabis to supply the entire country on one big farm in Indiana. Like, realistically speaking, how do you, before I worked at the Agency of Agriculture, I worked in DC on agricultural issues, and I've watched commodities collapse upon themselves where 4 major companies are dominating certain markets, right? That's going to happen, unfortunately. How can we still give craft operators that availability moving forward and that option for the consumer that's gonna still want that and not just want I always equate it to the alcohol industry, right? There's always going to be the people that want the 99-cent tall boy at the convenience store, but now there's folks that want to spend up to $20 on a 4-pack of a nice IPA or whatever you want to call it. So how can we position folks to, Vermont has a name from a craft perspective, not just in cheese, dairy, maple syrup, but it does have one in the illicit world from cannabis. How can we make sure that operators that have took this leap of faith with us can capitalize on that when something like federal legalization, whenever that may happen, and every time it's like a 2-step forward, 1 step back thing, it feels like right now, whenever that does happen, how can we still make sure that these folks have the business skills and the technical skills to succeed? I'm sure you hear all the time, I'm really good at growing this thing. Why doesn't it sell itself? I heard that a lot when I was at the Agency of Agriculture. Well, you need to have other skill sets to make you viable. You need to know how to run a business. A lot of these folks are really good at growing cannabis. They've done it in shadows for a long time, but they've never ran a business before. They need skill sets to help them maintain viability.
The community action agencies, which often supply small business help, are they able to work with cannabis operations without getting?
I don't know that answer specifically, but it's always easy to think about it in this context. If that support service agency receives federal funding, it's a really hard thing to compartmentalize that funding to help a federally illegal market find their footing. So even when we talk to other agencies, I came from the Agency of Agriculture. We've got a good relationship with the Agency of Agriculture, but there's certain things that they're unwilling to do, rightfully so, because of how much federal dollars flows through that agency. And they don't want to risk that funding because it would effectively render them unable to do the services that they need to do. So we're kind of on a lifeboat out at sea.
I will say Efficiency Vermont works with cannabis companies. That's all state money. And the BGAP, the governor specifically included cannabis companies in that money. Of course, it's all state money.
Representative O'Brien?
So like right now, if Representative Byrd or Nelson on their, RAP farms wanted to go big with cannabis, they would potentially, their federal grants would be in jeopardy.
Yes, even if it's in conservation or preservation or any federal dollars are flowing, even if you're on a diversified farm where the Agency of Ag has to come out and inspect something, technically, if they see something that's happening that's illegal on that piece of property, they need to report that to the folks that are operating or giving them the funding to operate that specific program. And the agency or the Department or Division of Water Quality receives a lot of funding from EPA.
And it's a different thing.
Right.
It's federally legal. And a lot of the same issues that you might think of if you're just passing a field versus a cannabis field, the smell, the odor, the look, they're all the same. It's about the THC percentage, which is that psychoactive component that renders you inebriated.
Representative Nelson?
Yeah, the 3 things, the difference between cannabis and cannabis, there's no way to lose money faster than growing hemp. Okay, been there, done that. Second of all, or milk cows, but yeah. Have you thought about adapting your program because you are handling the legalized portion of cannabis, of setting up within your own shop these classes that you're saying people need? That would be one way to go about it.
So we have what we call peer networking events where we do this kind of education. And, we had a fundamental choice at the start of this. Is our compliance team going to be sworn law enforcement officers, which is the trend in most states, or are they going to be people that know a thing or two about the industry? And we chose the latter. Our inaugural compliance director was Kerry Jagari, had 30 years at the Agency of Agriculture. He set up the hemp program here and has all the scars from that. One of his chief deputies, teaches cannabis cultivation at Castleton. So, the people that we have just spend a lot of time, individually with the licensees. And we do classes, but we're regulators here. We can't get into the business of also being the kind of support network for this industry in a way. I think that's where a lot of the problems came in with the EB5 program, is that the same people that are trying to oversee the program and people that are promoting it. So, we feel like we wrote a report about this. I was going to have Kyle kind of touch on it, but I think he's done a good job kind of setting the framework already. We spent a lot of time over the summer with the Land Access Opportunity Board and with the Forest Farm Viability and with Ellen Kaler from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, just figuring out how we could recreate some of the work they do, and the same kind of networks of support that they provide for farmers and the same kind of technical assistance at the Land Access and Opportunity Board or at ACCD to kind of do this. And it really just, the amount of money that they kind of said that they would need to do this well is just very minimal compared to other investments. But I think it would have a very impactful kind of outsized impact to do it. And we have a report that we're required to write that was submitted to the General Assembly in January. It's kind of laying out exactly what that would look like.
There is something called the Cannabis Business Development Fund, and there's been a couple one-time appropriations to that fund. Right now, the only folks that can access that fund are social equity licensees through the board. And we've heard wonderful things about how, and ACCD operates this fund. And we've heard wonderful things and some mixed things, if we're being, forthcoming, about how that money has been helpful to a lot of social equity licensees across the market. There's one-time payments that come out of this fund to support a lot of licensees, and then they get access to a consultant that might have these conversations like we are right now with that consultant to understand what they need from a business support perspective. Is it marketing? Is it understanding how to do your taxes? Is it how to, do articles of incorporation and bylaws for your business moving forward? How to right size your business so that it doesn't fail over the next 5 years. In the report, and I don't know if that report was uploaded onto your website or not. We're asking that there be $1 million annual appropriation to that fund. I think one of the things we've heard from ACCD is it's really hard to kind of future plan when you only have one-time funding every single year. Like, how can we, think about this over the next 5 to 10 years when we don't know what the funding is going to look like next year? And then in addition to that, open up funding to the small outdoor cultivators after social equity applicants have an opportunity to utilize that fund. That's and that money would come from cannabis revenue. So we are hopeful that we can find some pathways for technical and business assistance and work with the support networks that Pepper had just mentioned to kind of figure out how we can pump some life into them to give them some state dollars to help cannabis businesses.
Yeah, that report may not have been directed.
I don't think
May not have been directed to just give it to us. So it's out there somewhere. People want to look at it, but
The last thing I wanted to say was more of a statement that 2024 was the first year we didn't have to chop around any marijuana plants out in our 2,800 acres of cornfield. So I don't know if there'll be some more behind the scene grows this year, but there weren't any last year that I can attest to.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that, those cultivation numbers, does not represent a perfect capture of the former illicit market. I mean, some people are just never going to trust the government enough to get a license and go legal or care to subject themselves to kind of all the testing and packaging and labeling requirements. But, when you think about 75% of our cultivators being tier 1, I think a lot of those people were the people that were growing in their back 40 or in their basements or in their spare bedrooms. And I think they just, a lot of those folks are the ones that went legal.
And is it still legal to grow your 6 plants or whatever yourself and have your own?
Yeah.
So that's still legit.
Yeah.
And I will just say, as like a finer point of how I've approached this over the last 4 years, and I don't want to speak for Julie or Pepper. Hi, Julie. Forgot that you were on the board behind us. I don't think I ever anticipated that we'd get 100% of the illicit market, right? as Pepper said, these are folks that have been untrustworthy of the government for decades. How long is it going to take us to build that kind of equity and trust with these folks to kind of take this leap of faith with us? I kind of always thought that 15 to 20% would come with us no matter what. 15 to 20% would not come with us no matter what. And we've really focused on that middle 60 to 70%. How can we be inviting? How can we build trust that we're trying to make this market so that it doesn't turn into your concerns where it's a lot of out-of-state money, out-of-country money that's funneling into Vermont, and locals are not able to reap the benefit of this state market. So I think we've been moderately successful in doing so. But again, we've created this environment where it's really easy, relatively speaking, to get into. But what does that mean over the next couple of years when half of all small businesses fail, no matter what market you're in? And this is one of the most heavily regulated markets that are out there.
I just want to add to what you're saying, Kyle, in terms of the supports that we've had through Rhodes Consulting and ACCD. So we did a couple rounds of inquiry about a year and a half into that program to kind of evaluate the key performance indicators of it to see how people were using it and was it helpful. And overall, they said yes. But just as Kyle was saying, most of that was like one-off support. I need help with this one accounting issue. I need help with this one marketing issue. It didn't provide the sort of sustained education that folks will need to grow within this. And as we've sort of been talking about throughout this time, position themselves to be prepared for what comes next, whatever that looks like. So I just wanted to add to some of that we have been kind of consistently evaluating this program and how it's operated.
Yeah, just quickly, you mentioned like the Land Access and Opportunity Board. I just wondered if our organizations like VHCB or Land Trust, we often hear of they connected a forever farm with a young couple, first generation that wants to get into farming. Are they completely staying away from the whole cannabis world?
Now, yes.
They want clarity, and like any support network, if they have additional funding to help an additional industry versus everybody's got bandwidth issues, everybody's got budgeting issues, right? Like helping, we have 600 licensees, adding that to one of their, client lists, that's scary, So, I think if we can position folks to, those support networks to see value, I think that they'll come to the table, but, I think there's a wait and see approach right now.
So I know we're running short on time. I did want to just, we wrote a separate report at the request of Senate Economic Development and House Government Operations that I think really touches on the jurisdiction of this committee. And Julie kind of took the lead on that. It's around outdoor siting of cannabis cultivation. Originally, cannabis was designated a commercial commodity, not an agricultural product. So none of the right to farm exemptions in the law applied to cannabis cultivation, even if it was outdoors. Over time, the legislature has applied some of them, like, your cannabis cultivation farm won't be excluded from your current use plot, or you don't have to pay sales tax on your agricultural inputs if you're an outdoor cannabis cultivator. So some of those exemptions have started to apply, including an exemption from local zoning. That has led to at least one or two instances of neighborly disputes between people that are cultivating cannabis at a commercial scale in their backyard in a densely populated neighborhood. And so last year, the legislature added some setback authority to local municipalities over outdoor cannabis cultivation. And then they asked us to evaluate the impact of those decisions and kind of come with some recommendations or kind of some observations about how the implementation of that has been going. So Julie, if you don't mind, if Julie could just touch on that report, and maybe we can come back at a later date, because I think this is something that should be in your jurisdiction. It's for cannabis cultivation.
Let's hear about it. And if 5 minutes isn't enough time, Julie, we can schedule you to come in and go over it in more detail.
Well, I will make it 5 minutes for today, and I appreciate the committee's flexibility that I'm zooming in. We had a water feature in our basement this morning, which is resolved now. but it is that time of year. So as Pepper was saying, Act 166 really added sort of two new regulatory items to outdoor cultivation. One was it allowed towns to create cultivation districts. And then the other was it implemented automatic setbacks that started on January 1st. That were 50, 25, or 10 feet, depending on whether or not someone was cultivating inside a cultivation district, outside, or in a town that has no zoning. And as Pepper alluded to, the General Assembly asked us to evaluate the impact of those new regulations, along with some other things in this report. So we spent the summer doing a series of inquiries. So we did a survey of the municipalities in conjunction with the LCT, and then a roundtable with them to understand what the municipal issues might be. Kyle Harris held a cultivator roundtable where we did sort of the same thing, hearing from the cultivators on what their issues and the same setbacks and so forth would be. And then we did a preliminary mapping project where we looked at where all of our outdoor cultivators are and applied the setbacks to see what the impact would be on the ground. Would anybody be unable to cultivate if those setbacks were applied to them? And we did discover that if they were applied to existing licenses, there's about 11 cultivators that we are fairly certain would have a pretty significant impact. That's about 14,000 square feet of our total canopy. And just, I don't think Pepper mentioned it earlier, but our outdoor canopy is about 56% of our licensed canopy. So that's pretty impactful. That mapping had some limitations in that it couldn't tell us, for example, if all of the space on a particular property was suitable for cultivation. So it didn't tell us if there was a wetland or, the soil health or anything like that. So we know about those 11, but there certainly could be more. There could be other pieces that are at play in terms of the impact to outdoor cultivators. And then we took all that information to the work group that was outlined for us in Act 166. And we had 4 meetings where we unpacked all of that. And then we also heard from a planning director from the town of Williston and a law professor from Vermont Law to kind of talk about the land use pieces, how they actually work in real life, the cannabis, and how it interplays with cannabis. So I would be happy to come back and talk about the results. We put together a pretty thorough report for you. I will say the first 2 pages are the results of the 6 questions that you asked us to look at. So you can go right to those 2 pages and see the results. And then if you want to know what our logic was, the rest of the report addresses that. With the last maybe 2 minutes, I would just point out a couple of things that raised our concerns as a board while we were doing this. One is the setbacks are outlined in statute, but it's not clear how the legislature expects them to be measured. So we know that they're expected to be measured from the property boundary or the highway, but not what to. Whether or not that's meant to include barns or sheds on the property or just where the plant is. Those sort of questions make us nervous because it makes it difficult to, regulate consistently. And to that end, we're not certain what the legislature would like for us in terms of our role in compliance with those setbacks. Typically, the board would not enforce a town ordinance, which is essentially what these are. But we would like some clarity on that, I think would be really useful because again, the more we can do to have consistent, fair regulation across the board is best for the industry. So those are really the 2 things that stand out in my mind. We did hear that and the automatic nature, I should say. Actually, there's 3 things. So the automatic nature is of concern to us only because we're uncertain how or if all towns will enforce them. So we certainly have no issue with towns having setbacks within the boundaries that are set in Act 166. But for us, it's really important to know which towns intend to apply them and which don't. The only way we know that is through LCCs, like Representative Morgan was telling us that he's on his LCC in his town. Those are really helpful boards because our board, has a direct mechanism for communicating with the town in terms of making sure that our licensees are in compliance with local ordinance. But not as many towns as have licenses have set them up. It's actually quite a few that have not set up LCCs. So it would be helpful to us to encourage more LCCs in the state for that level of communication. And then throughout our conversations with cultivators in particular, they raised an issue around cultivation districts. And as Pepper has been saying, most of our cultivators are a quarter of a basketball field in size. And so if we ask them all to cultivate in one narrow district, there could be some unintended drift issues. And that was something that was raised by the cultivators. And I'm sure that they will, when they come in later today, tell you more about those issues and their concerns. But it was something that came through loud and clear to us. So again, happy to come back and give you more information, go through the report more thoroughly. But those are the things that I wanted to highlight for you today.
Right,
That was
thank
5
you,
minutes.
Julie. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry to hear about your basement troubles.
It is, it's living in Vermont in the winter.
Was there anything else, James, that you?
No, just to really thank you for, I mean, I know the politics of cannabis, are not always great. This is an intoxicating substance. There are negative public health potentials for this, but the people that are in this industry are struggling and they need the support of the State House, and they're creating, they're tax paying, job creating, revenue producing.
Creating tax revenue.
Yeah.
Just like any other ag or ag adjacent industry, revenue at the state level does not necessarily mean the foundation of the market is strong and healthy. I think that's what we're trying to impress on the committee today.
Are you, sort of to that point, anything that you've just mentioned, is there legislation that is pending that we might
So
see?
we every year have a good housekeeping bill. We try and just the market moves so quickly. It's being introduced in the House Gov Ops probably next week. But again, we don't ask for market expansion ideas. That's got to come from the industry itself. We'd like to be at the table, if you want to do kind of like a farmer's market allowance, for instance, over 21 farmer's market, we're going to have to license that and staff that and make sure everyone enforce the rules there. So I think you'll hear from the Cannabis Equity Coalition about their priorities. And, I really encourage you to hear from, any market participant about the struggles that they're facing and what sort of solutions that they might have. But anything when it comes to market expansion, we just love to kind of be part of the conversation. So the bill that you may see is really going to be about more effectively regulating the industry and not about any of these kind of policy shifts.
So that's a question maybe I should wait and ask to the next group of folks as well. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming in. A great overview, great introduction. And
I'll send the 3 reports that we wrote over the summer. They're on the legislative reports page, but just so that they're all in one spot. I'll make sure.
that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right.
Hey, I learned something today.
Right, cannabis.
I know.
Taking a break until 2:45.